So truth be told, I do not watch a lot of cable news. I watch some, I do watch some, and my personal frequency tends to kind of go up and down in cycles, usually depending upon what may be happening, out there in the world. But whenever I watch, and this applies to every station that I have tuned into, whether it be one that has a more conservative point of view or one that has a more liberal point of view. There is something that I have found to be common to just about every one that I have engaged with. And that is when the program begins, the host of that program offers like a monologue. He or she will speak for 5, 10, sometimes even more minutes, just kind of setting the stage for their show. They offer a little bit of some teasers as to the direction their program is going to go that day. And so this past Thursday evening, I tuned in to the Rachel Maddow show, and she began to offer her monologue. And as she spoke, there was a little bit of, I don't know, I'll call it heightened embellishment and facial expressions and so forth. So it was clear she was laying the groundwork towards some kind of share, some kind of announcement. And it felt a little similar to when you're listening to somebody, tell a joke, and there's a build up to what is going to be, a punchline. And so she built it up and she built it up and she built it up. And the gist of the build up being all around the changes that we have seen in our lives, in our country, in our world, this year. And then she finally got to, the punchline, if you will, the news of the day that she wanted to share, that was going to kick off her program, was that as of that Thursday evening, we had officially arrived at the halfway point of this year of 2020. And she noted how thankful she was for having made it through. She noted that she felt everybody should be very grateful, in knowing that those first 6 months can never come back and force us to relive them again. They are done, they are gone, and so on and so forth. Well, then on Friday morning, I sat down in my office to start going through my notes and organize my thoughts around writing the lesson for today. And I came upon a piece of paper where I had jotted down something I had seen on Facebook earlier in June. And I don't know the person, who posted it or wrote it, but when I can, I do still like to cite my sources. So these words that I'm going to share with you are written by someone whose name is Leslie Dwight. And so she, or perhaps he, wrote, "What if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loudly, finally waking us up from our slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change. Declare change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart." So while we might join with Rachel Maddow, in celebrating having survived, the first half of this year, and we could also, perhaps agree with her that, January through June of 2020 can never return. There is something about the first half of this year that returns every single day, sometimes every single moment. And it's been doing that, been doing that long before this particular year began. And that is change. Change. All kinds of change. That's our focus today. And specifically, seeing how we can make change our friend. So to start, let's take a few minutes to consider why change can often be so hard. I started thinking about that from my own personal experience and some reading I was doing, and a couple of things bubbled up immediately, no matter where I looked, and that was, first, change can be hard because many of us don't like it. A lot of people just don't like change, and at all. Some might like to have everything stay right as it is. We're comfortable. We know what to do. We know what to expect. No surprises. And then the second thing was that change is oftentimes daunting. It can be daunting, and that in turn can start pushing some of those internal buttons of ours, buttons of fear, fear of the unknown, or the button of doubt, the button of insecurity and uncertainty. And the thing about that is that can happen even when we're the ones who have initiated the change. We decide to change from being single to getting married. We decide to change by stepping away from one career and entering into a brand new one. We make the decision to change from not having children to starting a family, from living in one city for several years and then moving to a brand new city. See, even then, in those kinds of changes that we start ourselves, the fears can arise. There's all kinds of uncertainties and unknowns that can exist as well. And the thing about change is that it's always happening. It's always happening. It is present in the more significant experiences I just mentioned and others like them, but it's also present on a much smaller scale. Change is not only associated with experiences that bring incredible, pain or sorrow, and it's not only associated with experiences of change that bring us, happiness and joy. At some point, everything will change. Nothing in life ever remains static. There is an impermanence that is unavoidable. Our lives, others' lives, nature, change. It's pretty much, it's like a universal law, and it's been happening for billions of years in the natural world, and it happens constantly in our lives. And so learning how to accept change and practice acceptance of change as the inevitable thing that it is, well, that's how we can avoid finding ourselves beginning to live in places of long-lasting disappointment or increased levels of stress or anxiety. It's how we can bring ourselves some mental and emotional peace and happiness and contentment and improved overall well-being instead. It's how we begin to make change our friend. So a few things we can consider as we think about stepping into making that kind of a shift is first of all, maybe we can just consider what I'll call thinking small when it comes to change. Some of those more anxious emotions that we can feel in times of change can hit us pretty powerfully when that change is on a grander scale, when there's some largeness to it. And in the same way, those emotions can surface when we see something that we want to change, but it hasn't yet. So maybe one way to help ourselves not get too overwhelmed, as we might otherwise be, is to look at change with new eyes, with greater awareness, and look at the changes that happen in the moment, from one moment to the next. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the course of those 5 seconds, statistics tell us that 21 new babies have joined us here in this planet, here in this world. And if we kept counting and we paused for a full minute, statistics tell us, and of course these are pre-COVID-19, that 107 people will have passed from this life. The clouds that were overhead outside my window here when the service began are no longer there. They have passed by. Waves out on the bays and the lakes have risen and fallen many times over, changing each of those bodies of water just as many times. And looking back maybe an hour or so or a couple of hours ago, maybe we can see that our thoughts and emotions that are with us right now have changed from what they were earlier this morning. And so I offer these kinds of examples to help us gain a sense of the tremendous freedom that is available to us when we remember that this is the way life is. All things that come will and do pass. And so this is really a practice of mindfulness when you think about it. You're mindfulness not only of the constancy of change, but also mindful of the feelings and the emotions that we have as they arise in times of change. Being mindful in the moment, it helps us to more immediately feel into our feelings in lieu of ignoring them or just allowing them to settle and start to do their festering inside of us. It helps us to do that regardless of what category the change may fall into. Maybe to be mindful of the fear or the grief and be mindful of the joy and success and sense of achievement. And it also helps us become aware of our reactions to those emotions when they show up, and whether or not our reactions to them are helping us or hindering us in accepting and moving into and through and beyond the change. If we can incorporate mindfulness into our daily practices in some way, letting it remind us in gentle ways that whatever experience of change that comes our way, large or small, is going to pass by eventually, then that provides us with a great sense of strength, I think, and support as we start encountering the changes that may not be small or simple or easy or not always welcome. Also, with regards to the practice of mindfulness, when we remember to breathe, when we just remember to breathe, and we remain aware of our feelings and we begin to work with them, there's a couple of things that can happen for us. First, we find ourselves moving immediately into that place of accepting the change, whatever it is that's taking place. And then that in turn allows us to completely release whatever we might call it, whether we call it a need or a desire to move into a place of resistance. I thought about all of us here in northern Michigan, and y'all were alluding to it in our earlier time of just checking in with each other before the service started. But I thought of all of us here in this part of the state when I was reading a blog written by Jim Blake. And you may remember Jim is the CEO of Unity World Headquarters. And in his blog, he said, "I would like to be as welcoming to every change in my life as I am to springtime after a long, harsh winter." I mean, how apropos is that to us here in northern Michigan? Can we imagine welcoming every change in our lives with the same excitement and enthusiasm and expectation and open arms as we welcome the change that is winter to spring in this area? Now, to be abundantly clear, Jim also pointed out in his writing that there are indeed times for what he called proper resistance, such as what we've been witnessing of late around matters of social injustice, for example. He wrote that this particular statement that he made of welcoming every change in his life without resistance being, what you would infer from that, is that was referring to our own individual mental and emotional resistance to change when the entire world is going to change no matter what we do. I sat with this whole process of resistance a little bit, and the most powerful example that I could think of from my own life when it comes from making the shift from resistance into acceptance is with regards to the diagnosis of fibromyalgia that I received back in 1993. That remains the most powerful example to date that I can come up with. And the best way that I can describe that relative to the change that was happening in my life is to share two statements that were offered by a psychiatrist that my diagnosing doctor had asked me to talk with to help me begin navigating the changes in my life. And one of the statements was made directly to me, just one-on-one. And the psychiatrist said, "This illness is not life-threatening. However, it is life-altering." The second statement was made to my then husband. He had been invited to join with me in one of the sessions because he was having a hard time, understanding all of the changes, and I was still struggling, trying to put it into words, myself. And the statement that the psychiatrist made to him was, she doesn't remember what it feels like to not be in pain. Now, both of those statements, and actually it's more my reaction to those two statements, took me right into a place, or I allowed myself to go into a place of incredible resistance. And the more I resisted, the more my fears of the changes taking place increased. The more I resisted, the sadder I became. The more I resisted, the angrier I became. The more miserable I became, the more sedentary I became. And the end of the line for all of that for me was a clinical depression. And I'm very grateful that that was the rock bottom. It didn't go any further than that, because when I arrived there, that got my attention. That snapped me out of the resistance, and it helped me to get the help I needed to accept that having a life that is altered, not ended, doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Now, that snapping out of the resistance didn't happen by the following Thursday. All right, it took time. But the work I did in counseling and therapy and then on my own, it spanned a period of about 5 or 6 years. And there were a lot of ups and downs during those years, not only with adjusting to the illness, but just life changes. It just got done saying moments ago, there's a whole lot of changes happening all the time. But eventually, those ups and downs smoothed out, and I reached a point of understanding that I could make friends with fibromyalgia. And for me, that came down to changing just one thought that I was carrying around me for those 5 or 6 years, and I was saying it out loud a lot. I used to always say that I was living with fibromyalgia. It became my friend the moment I changed that statement to say fibromyalgia is living with me. See, instead of waking up and feeling into the physical discomfort and saying good morning to the illness, which had just taken over my thoughts, I started waking up saying good morning to the day. Good morning to the day, the gift of that day and all that it held for me to experience. And everything shifted. Everything shifted. Everything just began to transform. And transformation is very important to keep in mind when we think about making change our friend, because transformation is something that is always possible. It's always possible. Once we let go of our resistance to change, then we're no longer resisting at least one meaning for being here in this life, which is to become something more than we were before the change occurred. And I really wish, and maybe it'll happen one day, that we could find a simple, easy, almost automatic way to take all of the examples that nature gives us and apply them to our lives when it comes to transformation. The palm tree. The palm tree that transforms muddy water into sweet coconut milk. Might we see that as a transformation of our fears into courage? Or the lotus flower that has to travel and navigate its way and grow through all the mud and the muck that's existing below the surface of the water before it reveals its beauty to us once it breaks through the surface. Might that be a model for us as to how we can transform negativity into positivity, possibility, potentiality? And then, of course, there's the transformation from the caterpillar's mindset of change, being the end of the world, into that of the beauty of the free-flying butterfly. Might that inspire us to transform a loss into a new beginning? There is an author by the name of Maria Robinson who wrote that nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending. Note her words, go back. You can't go back and start a new beginning. Once a change, once an event, once a loss, once even a joy, has occurred, we can't go back and give it another go. Just as Rachel Maddow was offering, we can't go back and relive anew January through June of this year. It's done, it's over, it's gone. But anyone, you, me, anyone can start right now in this moment to create a new ending. And so we start to create our new endings as we continue to move in the change, to keep moving through the change, creating the ending we want to see because of that change. Maybe we can go back for a moment and just bring the vision back of our bays and our lakes and so forth from before. I'm not a water person. I'm not knowledgeable of how things work out on the water. So I was reading a little bit about the way someone might navigate their way upon it. And it struck me as a way to describe or possibly depict our moving forward in change. Because what I was reading noted that when someone is out on a boat, or perhaps on one of those stand-up paddleboards, they said that the rowing or the paddling is done in the dip of the wave so that the person is ready to then ride the next crest. So if we use that picture in our minds as a depiction for how we can move through the flow of life, being with that flow of life that enables us to face and deal with whatever arises from one moment to the next. And so I'd like to close our lesson time for today by taking us into a brief experience of how we can use our practices of meditation and prayer to help us put that picture into practice. And it's one I came across on the Huffington Post website. It was created by a husband and wife author team. Their names are Ed and Deb Shapiro. And I've made some edits just to have it apply more specifically to what we're talking about here today. But we're going to look at, we look at the cresting and falling of the waves, the ebbs and the flows of the tide. We're going to take that part of the image and use our breath. Our breath is going to take the place. We're going to use that as our anchor, something that gives us a sense of stability and steadiness. And then on the inhale of our breath, that's going to represent our intention to be present, to be mindful, and to affirm change is our friend. The exhale of our breath will be a time to just release whatever conflicting emotions may be, with any of us right here, right now, this morning, in this moment, or those that may arise the next time any kind of change appears in your life. And this in and out of our breath is symbolic of the comings and the goings of all things in life. Okay? So let's just take a moment. If you want to, need to, just become as comfortable as you can where you are and begin to make your intentional connection with the divine in you and just relax into the experience. And so we begin just by gently breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. And feel or even watch the natural rhythm of your breathing. Keep following the flow of your breath and let your mind now relax into the rhythm. And now now with each breath in, just silently repeat, may I be well, may I be peaceful, may I flow with the changes. May I be well, may I be peaceful, may I flow with the changes. And with each breath exhaled, release whatever may be impeding that flow. And so we'll do this a few times. May I be well, may I be peaceful, may I flow with the changes. I release what is mine to release and make change my friend. May I be well, may I be peaceful, may I flow with the changes. I release what is mine to release and make change my friend. May I be well, may I be peaceful, may I flow with the changes. I release what is mine to release and make change my friend. And now one last breath in. And with the exhale, just see your heart smile. And so it is. Amen.